welcome to the Dr. Sound Academy webinar from May 12th, 2020. I'm Warren Strem, the Regional Sales Manager for West and Northern Canada. I am going to be discussing today the new TS-820 and TS-920 infrared wireless conferencing systems from TOA. It's a ground-up redesign of our previous conferencing systems, and we'll go through some of the features and benefits and why this is such a fantastic solution for conference tables of today. So of course we'll touch base first on a bit of the history of TOA conferencing and the quality therein. Then we'll move along to the various applications, speakers and specifications, and setup tips and examples as we go through. So starting with the history of quality, we've been doing conferencing systems since 1978. So we've got lots and lots of practice in this particular field, and started out with the TS-5000. So as you can see, it's gone through a lot of different iterations over the years, culminating in, of course, around 2004, the TS-800, 900 was released, and that was upgraded to the TS-910 series in 2014. And now, 6 years later, we are in the new generation. So out with the old and in with the new. As you can see, this is going to be visually a very, very big change. So we're very, very excited to see this new redesign that brings us to more of an appropriate look for the boardrooms of the 21st century. For applications, TS-820 and 920 are very, very, very flexible, being infrared conferencing systems. So we can use them in meeting spaces of various sizes, meant for the small to medium-sized conference space. But whether it's a meeting room, a conference, or a council chamber, it fits perfectly. And of course, because it is so easy to set up and it is wireless, that makes it perfect for special event rentals and councils where you're not exactly always in an installed situation, and you maybe have to be a little bit more flexible in terms of your setup. So very, very handy in terms of those applications. So looking at council chambers, like I say, public boardrooms, corporate boardrooms, universities, hospitals, hotels, tribal councils, any of these kinds of things are excellent applications, and of course many, many more than that as well. So a little video kind of going over the aesthetics of the new system and how it works. Of course, some of the main features involved with this upgrade, as you can see on the screen here, we've got it's visually noiseless design. So that's a very important feature for this particular iteration of our conferencing systems. Of course, quality sound. That's one of TOA's top qualities is always about the quality of the sound. We're always about intelligibility here at TOA, so we want to make sure that you hear the message with every syllable that is spoken. Of course, we also have a free layout, being wireless. We have secure information because we're on infrared, so your signals cannot pass through walls. We're on light signals, so a solid wall means your information is secure. We can do recording with this system, either on USB or on analog remote recorders. We also have control software, voting capabilities, feedback suppression built in, and a maximum maximum count of 192 units in a system. So we can do a fairly sizable setup. Having a quick look at the appearance and basic functions of the system, I'll go over a couple of the more important things here. Of course, we have voting start and end that is present on the central units, the TS-820RC and 920RC. Recording control in that position as well. You record on the USB storage and PC connection. We've got feedback suppression, also controlled from the master unit, or the control center. And as you look towards the back of the unit, we've got our inputs on here, auxiliary and mic inputs. unit line connectors for the transmitter receivers, and recording and line outs along with the external control terminal using RS-232 and USB to take operation from a PC or external control unit. More up towards the top, of course, on the microphone side of things, we have a mic in use indicator, which is new to the system at the top of the gooseneck. Of course, the monitor speaker is there on the base of the microphone. There are headphone jacks on either side of the microphone pod, and of course, battery packs would go directly into the back of the unit, and those can be removed and charged. And there is the potential that you could power these locally with a wired power supply as well, if you prefer to do so, rather than using the batteries and relying on remembering to charge your batteries, etc. A little bit more into it here. Of course, the 820 RC and the 920 RC central units are rack mountable. So if that's a requirement for you, no problem. The rack kit is optional, so you can certainly order that in addition to your system. A lot of these things are quite similar to the previous page. So quickly hitting on the fact that 4 transmitter receivers can be connected directly to it, but that is not the limitation for how many receivers you actually can put in. You can actually have a much higher count of IR receivers throughout the space, and we'll get into that a little bit further on. But of course, to achieve that, you'd use antenna distribution in order to make your cabling efficient to chain in all of those receivers. On the master microphone pod, the chairman's microphone pod, the presence of the priority speech key is very important, because that, of course, is one of the things that differentiates the chairman mic from the delegate microphones. As we look a little bit further into things, have a look at the speech control side of things. Mentioned the chairman's priority. So that switch allows the chairman to have priority over who else is speaking in the facility. So if the chairman needs to override the other speakers in the place, it's a single button press for them to do that. There's a tone chime, and you can you can choose whether the mic that was previously in use gets restored or is just cut off when the chairman is done speaking. You can also adjust the number of open mic settings, because we don't want to have, we don't want it wide open so that just everybody can talk all at once, because then, of course, no one would understand anything that's happening. So we can limit it to 4 or less mics, so you can set that setting however you prefer. And when it comes to the priority selector, we can select the order in which people are brought in or out of the conversation. You can choose whether it's the first speaker will always have priority, or you can choose whether the latest speaker will always take over, or whether it's first, fixed, next is latest. So there's various different ways to set that up. If any mics are not manually turned off after speaking, the system will turn them off automatically if they're not in use for approximately 30 seconds or more. Feedback suppression, very, very, very important feature. Of course, we're all quite familiar with what feedback suppression will do in an audio system if we've ever worked with one before. So we want to make sure we can limit it. So this is how a feedback suppressor typically will work in our systems. Now, this is, of course, not the system that we're talking about. That is actually a video based on the M633D, but the technology is exactly the same. And in the TS-820 and 920, it's completely automatic, so you don't have to press a button on the front of the unit to activate it, like was shown in the demo there. If it's turned on, it will just act automatically on the system. So as we know, feedback occurs when a mic picks up the sound from the speaker that's being fed from that same microphone, and that causes a feedback loop, which causes that hum that we just heard. So what the feedback suppressor here is doing is it's notching out the frequencies that are causing those feedback tones, and helping you to have an intelligible conversation. Now, there are several ways to do feedback suppression with the TS series. Externally, we can plug it into an external geographic equalizer to have feedback suppression done that way. We can turn it off entirely so that we don't have feedback suppression function, or we can leave it on automatic, which automatically searches and suppresses frequencies that are generating acoustic feedback. So that is, of course, the most likely way that we expect to see it used. Now, something to note on the new version is that the TS-820 and 920 has a 7-point filter, or rather have 7-point filters for feedback suppression, whereas the TS-910 series only had 1 point of filtering. So we have much better feedback suppression in the newer system than we had in the previous version. Stepping on to digital recording, we now have a full recording function both internal to the unit, and we have the connection for analog recording to an external controller, recorder rather. So the big thing, we expect to see the onboard memory function being used most likely as often or more often than analog recording. So a few points on that. We can do up to 32 gigabytes of external USB memory. So that's a ton when you consider that the internal memory that can do 1 gigabyte is approximately 18 hours and 40 minutes. Almost 19 hours can be stored directly on the internal memory, and then you can add another 32 gigs on. So very impressive memory for a system this size. And formatting wise, 32K 128 MP3 file formats, and very simple file names, of course. And of course, then you have playback and file management for PC, et cetera, et cetera. So very handy feature, of course, in any modern day conferencing system to be able to record. Voting, also extremely important in the TS-920 specifically. It is not available in the TS-820. So the TS-920RC has the voting start buttons and whatnot, and can control this. So that is, of course, step 1, voting started from the central unit or the chairman unit. The chairman also has the ability to start voting. Step 2, of course, the voting is done by the delegate stations by pressing one of the buttons present on those stations. Then step 3, of course, we terminate the voting by hitting the start end button on the central unit, or alternatively the chairman unit's talk key. Then the results are indicated on the central unit and on any voting result displays that might be connected to software. So multilingual conferencing is a very important thing in the world today as well, especially in Canada, where we have a few different languages flying around. So in this example, we are showing a bilingual monitoring. So we've got 1 original language and 2 interpreted languages being fed into the system, and we're able to do that very simply. And then the audience at each delegate station is able to listen to whichever language they prefer based on what selection they have indicated on the headphone jacks on their delegate units. So very, very simple setup and very effective for doing these kinds of interpretation type of systems. Installation testing, also very important to know for sure that everything is installed correctly and working and connected. So the TS-820 and 920 do give you visual representation that you are connected and that everything is working properly before you even start your conference. Before you even start doing sound checks, you get those confirmations from the system. So it will give you the installation status for the expansion units, bridge units, transmitter receivers, and conference units. And this can all be checked from the central unit. To run these checks, switch on the power at the central unit while holding down the voting start end button, and it will then report back to you with a result that indicates how many have installed chairman units, how many installed delegate units, and then a total number of installed chairman and delegate units combined. And of course, we're flexible on those quantities, so that's why it differentiates them. Now, of course, you do have to be very concerned about the location of your transmitter receivers in relation to the microphone pods, because the location of the infrared receivers is very important. So you have to make sure that you are in the service area of the transmitter receiver with pod in order to make sure that it works. Also, there is a low battery indicator on the central unit, and that will flash when one of the mic pods goes into a low battery status scenario, and that pod will also blink to indicate that it's running low on batteries as well, to give you that warning. External control, we have all kinds of different ways to control this. Externally, of course, the main one that we're most likely to see in use is software. We are finalizing the translation of our software to work really well with this system, of course, and we can adjust various different things. So from the software to the central unit, we can control mic on-off, speech requests, cancellations rather, voting starting and stopping, installation checks, total inputs, setting queries, et cetera, et cetera. You can see the full list of the features that are affected by controls from either the central unit to the software, or from the central unit to or from the software to the central unit. When it comes to software, we're very flexible about that. We can provide you with a software package, development package, so that you can develop your own software. But of course, we will be launching our own software to go with it. So that's going to allow full control over up to 192 units. Up to 4 units can talk simultaneously. Basically, you can make the system run as normal and have a full functionality from the software. Some of the real keys there are, of course, integration with a CCTV system, integration with card access systems, encryption security, pie chart, voting results, these kinds of things. Also, from external control systems, if you're using something, maybe just a third-party controller, you can then also have control as you would from software, but in a different, obviously, a different footprint and a different control structure, mostly affecting speech request cancellations, speech requests, etc. When it comes to pressing the unit's conference speech, the conference unit speech switch, it causes the indicator lamp located on the top of the unit to flash. This is when you are doing a speech request rather than automatically taking over. So when that starts flashing, then of course the chairman will have the ability to allow the speech request to be approved, or they can cancel it and not approve for that pod to have access to the system. Here's a look at our software. As you can see, various different features involved. We have full control here. You can load an image onto the graphic display area, so that you could then locate the delegate stations however you see fit for your space, for your best control structure. Of course, you can do. You have your camera control options are here. Mic volumes, number of people online reporting. Communication statuses to make sure your network is still up and running, et cetera, starting the conference, ending the conference, all of these things, remaining time in the conference, all are reported here. And of course, the most important thing that we find from the software side of things is, of course, the voting reporting. So that can be sent to a external display from the software, or just reported directly on the software itself, or again, on the central unit. On the system setup side of things, the maximum number of conference units is 192 on the TS-920, and it's 64 maximum units on the TS-820 system. So the TS-820 is really just the more economical version of the TS-920. Doesn't have the voting features and doesn't have the same maximums as the TS-920. There are no limitation on the number of chairman's units versus delegate units, as long as the total number is less than 192 or 64, depending on which store. No relation at all between the number of infrared transceivers and the number of conference units. As long as the conference unit is within the transceiver area, service area, you will be covered and your signal will get through. What is really important is to realize a sufficient infrared service area and wiring of coax cable. Of course, when you're wiring coax for infrared, you do have to be cognizant of a few things, and we'll get into that in a minute. When we talk about maintaining the service area of the transmitter receivers, we need to make sure we're using the correct transmitter receivers for the space, and that we're in the coverage area with mic pods. So to do that appropriately in a room with a lower ceiling, we would use a TS-905, whereas a higher ceiling, we might use a TS-907 for the higher power but lower radius of communication area. So it's a narrower pattern for higher ceiling application. The mic has a 90-degree transmission angle on its infrared receiver, which is on the back of the microphone pod. So do not block that port, because if you do, you will lose line of sight to the transmitter receivers, and your signal does not go through from there. Very, very important, as I mentioned, to make sure that the infrared transceivers rather can see the pods. You need to have that direct line of sight. So this is an example of where it is correct versus where it is incorrect to install the transceivers in relation to the mic pods. And of course, on the red side and the failure side, we can obviously see that that transceiver is not in the coverage pattern of the mic pod. Whereas on the right-hand side, we can see that this is installed correctly, and the mic pod and the transceiver can see each other. They have full line of sight from one lens to another, so that is the best way to install this, obviously. When installing the transceivers, you want to make sure they are far away from the nearest window. We don't like sunlight when it comes to infrared. That is the biggest polluter of infrared for any kind of a system. So if you can avoid getting sunlight into the system, that would be ideal. So you want to make sure that your transceivers are installed at least 2 to 3 meters away from the nearest window so that sunlight is minimized. If you cannot do that, then curtains or blinds would be necessary, and that will work to eliminate the infrared pollution from sunlight. Make sure you install the transceivers away from lighting equipment as well. So you want to be about 2 feet or more away from the nearest fluorescent light in the room. Of course, any light fixture can emit some infrared, and that counts as infrared pollution when it comes to the system, and can have an effect on intelligibility and functionality. So you want to make sure that you're not too close to the lights. Also, making sure that your transceivers are not too close to walls. We don't want the infrared signal to be directly bounced off the wall and sent back into the transceiver, creating essentially basically a feedback loop. But doesn't quite work that way. It would be more of an echo or a delay, but we don't want to do that. Again, to eliminate the possibility of an unintelligible signal, we want to know exactly what the presenter is saying at any given time. If your lights are flush mounted or mounted above the transceivers, it's unlikely to be much of an issue. We're more concerned with lights that are below the transceivers, as they will have more likelihood of radiating infrared pollution into the transceivers. As I mentioned, there are some things to be concerned with when it comes to wiring the transceivers in. So they wire on coaxial cable. The central unit has 4 coaxial connectors, and you can use up to 2 distributors per line. So that allows you to go up to a total of up to 16 TS-905 units, or up to 12 of TS-907, or a mix of TS-905 and 907. Of course, TS-907 requiring a bit higher power. You cannot power quite as many of them. But that is all done through distribution. And so there is a little bit of math to do, I suppose, when it comes to wiring these in, because when it comes to wiring coaxial for infrared, you do have to make sure that all your wires are of equal length. And that gets to be a little bit challenging when you're dealing with distribution. So at the end of the day, there is a calculation that will deal with the wiring loss and voltage drop that's involved. And that is here. You see how this all kind of goes together if you really look at it. But I'm not going to make you do that, because we have a fully functional tech support department, and they are there and waiting and happy to help you put together a design, and they'll do this math for you. So if you have any questions about how you need to have this system wired, once we've got the design in place and the room structure and everything, our guys can help you put together the wiring structure so that you know exactly how it has to go together. This is a simple application example, a one that's probably the most likely that we're going to see on a regular basis. This consists of a central unit, either the TS-820 or 920 RC. And then in the case of the delegate stations, we have the 821 as the chairman unit in the 820 system, with the TS-822 as the delegate units. We have the TS-923 short mic on each and every one of those. That is a standard length mic. There is also a longer one that's more meant for standing. But if you're sitting, TS-923 is the mic to go to, of course. If you're looking at a TS-920 system rather than an 820 system, it's exactly the same setup. You just replace all the 8s with 9s. As you can see in the bottom left corner, very, very flexible. You can, if you have to adjust or move tables around or move to different spaces, very, very simple to do, as long as you can get those infrared receivers into those spaces. Tips on microphone selection and installation. The two new microphones, TS-923 and 924, are more sensitive than the previous models, the 903 and the 904. They have a dual flex, which the 903 and 4 didn't have, and of course the light on the top, which I don't believe the 903 had, or if it did, it wasn't as bright. And of course, they are a little bit longer. They are more sensitive. So if you do prefer to use the older TS-903 and 904 for this system, you certainly can. But bearing in mind the older mics are not as sensitive, so we do not recommend mixing the 923 with the 903 or the 924 with the 904, just because of the differences in sound quality that they provide. As I mentioned, the TS-924 is suitable for standing and speaking, whereas the 923 short mic is more suitable for sitting and speaking. And we don't want to have that microphone too close to the mouth. That is the biggest difference probably between the new system and the old system, is that the 920 and the 820 microphones are much, much more sensitive, so that you don't need to be very, very close to the microphones. In fact, it's best to be about a foot away from these microphones to make them work appropriately, because if you are too close, even with compression, this can cause the sound to clip, which is something that we obviously don't want. It's a hindrance to intelligibility. So we do have to have a bit of a cultural shift in the way that these mics work versus the ways the old ones work, because you're not as close. You can push it a little bit further away, have your laptop in between. And that mic will still pick you up just fine. So we don't need to eat what we say in the pro audio world, we don't need to eat the microphone. So there will be a little bit of perhaps a learning curve involved in that, but as with any improvement, that's always going to be the case. Now, as I mentioned, when it comes to the design side, we can assist. Our design team works with all parties involved to design a full package proposal for system solutions. They work with myself and the other regional sales managers from across the country, directly with our dealers and end users, with engineers, and then our tech support team is able to create this package to fit the requirement of the building, taking into account sound quality, space dimensions, and project cost, of course. So thank you very much for attending.